I thank everyone for coming, and I see the whole team from AOT is definitely here. And we thank the secretary and his team for being here today. I usually say in my own life that, and I just said this to Emily, excitement's highly overrated, because usually when there's big excitement in my life, it's usually something's not good. And I think for those of us that have been on transportation, both in the House and the Senate, we're not surprised where we are. This is something that I think we've both talked about on the floor of the Senate, and the direction we were headed. And I think what we're going to hear today will be quite sobering for people and everyone out there. And the indicators that we got last winter when Candace came in and talked about the direction that we were headed, and we're headed to a place that by the end of this decade, in 2029, if we don't do something, that we could have as much as 60% of our roads in poor or very poor condition. That's something that was very sobering to us. And I think I'm glad we're all here now, and I'm glad we've got a chance to start to think about where we want to be and what we want to do going forward. And with that, unless you'd like to add anything.
Good afternoon. Thank you all for being here. Appreciate that. And I think that the presentation will speak for itself, and then we'll head into questions and from there and see, continue the dialogue of kind of reality of where we are and what's in front of us.
And with that, I see we have Tom Cavett, who's the first on our agenda. And Tom, if you would like to kick us off and give us some perspective about revenues and with the downgrade in revenues and where that rolls out to.
Yes, I'd be happy to. And as you said, Senator Westman, this is not a new issue. We have provided 5-year forecasts in addition to the statutory requirement for 2-year forecasts for more than 20 years now. For at least the last decade, if you look at the longer term growth prospects for the T-fund categories, they've been consistently subaltern. And in the last forecast that we did in July, the total T-fund forecast through fiscal year 30, every single year revenues are expected to grow significantly below rates of general inflation, which really sets up kind of a mismatch in terms of revenue coming in and expenditures. We don't forecast expenditures, so obviously there's specific things that affect transportation expenses, things associated with road maintenance and road building and bridge building and maintenance and all that. But I would be surprised if those rates were lower than inflation that's commonly discussed via the Consumer Price Index or Personal Consumption Expenditure Price Index. So that's kind of the core issue. The reason that the revenues aren't growing at a pace consistent with inflation is that many of the revenue sources are based on either a per user fee or a per gallon of consumption, and not necessarily a price. Now, there's been a price base to the gas tax with the motor fuel assessment tax, but gas prices have also been relatively tame. So it's not like we've gotten a lot of growth out of that. And gasoline consumption has been declining for many years as vehicles become more efficient. And with the pandemic, there was also a big drop in gas consumption due to less travel. And some of that has persisted, uh, such that there's not as many miles driven for the same population. And we don't have rapid growth in population. So, the gas tax is flat or declining when you add it all up. Diesel is not a whole lot different. Motor vehicle fees are, unless there's a fee increase, as there was recently, you'll get a one-time step up, but then the growth, you don't get a lot of growth in that. And so motor vehicle purchase and use is kind of the only category that can occasionally exhibit growth that's at or above rates of inflation. And it's been impacted heavily by the tariffs. There's still a lot of uncertainty, but there's no doubt that prices are going to be up for vehicles. Uh, and uh, that's not that's the highest growing category in the transportation fund in terms of revenues, but it's not anything like some of the general fund categories and other categories. So when you add all that up, you're looking at fiscal uh, you know 2026 of available transportation fund revenues only growing 1.6%, and then 0.8, 1.4, 1.6, and 1.5 through fiscal year 2030. So that's kind of the revenue side of it. I'd be happy to answer any questions. And uh, that's our most recent analysis of that.
Go ahead. Oh,
Tom, hi, good to see you. At the e-board, I remember you saying that everywhere else in the country, there was a sort of a growth bubble of sales, car sales purchases. And you didn't see that in Vermont. And at the time, it seemed like you thought maybe there was like some sort of data anomaly that you wanted to spend a little more time digging into. I'm wondering where you are on that now.
No, there was some pre-buying that occurred nationally. That was a story. People are expecting tariffs to raise the price of vehicles pretty significantly. So there was some advance buying that went on. We didn't really get a big lift from that. And so when sales dropped, when they were weak, especially in the last 2 months of the fiscal year, we thought there could be some collection issue or something like that. If that were the case, we would have seen it bounce back strongly in the first 2 months of this fiscal year, and that really didn't happen. Revenues are pretty much, on track. There's a little bit of a bounce, but nothing significant enough to say, oh, we'd raise our forecast given the first 2 months. So we're pretty much on target, but that target is not very high.
Thanks.
go ahead.
Yeah, Tom, hi, Jennifer Click. I don't have your tables in front of me here. Can you just tell me the percentage reduction in revenue to the transportation fund? You gave us the dollar numbers.
The reduction between the January forecast and the July forecast was a little over $7 million. And it's roughly over the 5-year horizon. It's not like it gets a whole lot worse, but it doesn't get a whole lot better. So it's between about $5 and $7 million, maybe 7.5, something like that, depending on the year. So, as a percentage differential, that's not huge. On an available general fund of more than $300 million, but that's still significant and doesn't make life any easier.
You don't have the percentage right there. I thought maybe on your table it showed, or maybe that's just the JFC's table.
Relative to the last forecast, percent change. Let me just see. I think there was a table in the forecast document at the start of the revenue. No, it just gives the total dollar amount. So, 7.5 million divided by, 318 million, roughly. That's a percent downgrade from January. So the July actuals were about 2.3% below forecast. So that's the rough percentage. And then, there are times that when there's a variation that, we'd say, okay, well, that's likely to bounce back, or that's a temporary situation or cyclical, but that's really not the case. Again, that's largely because of the structure of the various revenue sources, and motor vehicle purchase and use is really the only one that might get much of a cyclical rebound. But there are a lot of things in the economy, especially with inflation pushing up, that might argue against even much of a cyclical rise. If anything, consumer spending is at risk of stalling out rather than accelerating.
So Tom, the historical trends in inflation in transportation projects, I think the agency will probably be the best people to speak about that. But there is a concern that I've heard, and I don't really know the details around it, particularly around bridge building, where the steel in that is, and there's been some concern about tariffs on steel. And can you talk a little bit about that? And where do we get our steel? And why would that particular area be at risk going forward?
Well, the way the tariffs work is they're essentially a tax on imported steel. And if you raise the price of imported steel, domestic steel also goes up in price. And people buy more of it, but it also tends to rise at the same time. But, everything made with steel and aluminum right now is getting a lot of price pressure. So in the case of bridge building, you not only have the steel that's used in the bridge that would be going up, especially anybody quoting a price for the future, but a lot of the machinery that's used to construct the bridge, the cranes and the excavators and all the skid steers and things like that are part of a project, they're also largely made with steel. I mean, there's just a lot of steel in construction in general, but especially with something like bridge building, steel cables on the crane and all this. So all of that is going to go up in price more significantly than other costs. The labor component won't go up that much, then for paving, there's, petroleum-based products and things like that. That's not going up as much, but the steel and aluminum tariffs, but particularly steel for bridge building, would be very significant and of no help in terms of controlling costs.
Thanks.
And the fact that there's just a lot of demand for all kinds of construction projects still, as monies that have been previously allocated for infrastructure are spent down. So we're seeing pretty big backlogs with contractors still trying to get work done, and that also has pushed up prices.
Very good. You ready to move on? Thank you, Tom.
Thank you very much. If there are follow-up questions, feel free to email and such.
We will, don't worry.
Okay,
Thank you.
sure thing.
So next on our agenda is an analysis of the funding gap and fiscal pressures. And I don't know how you want to do this, but we're grouped with Logan Moodbury from a Joint Fiscal, Jeremy Reed from the chief engineer at the agency, and Candace, the fiscal officer. So if you're going to come up together or one at a time, or?
Do you, Jeremy, you want to
We'll
talk out?
decide what that works for you, Karen.
Yep.
Thank you.
So you should have our presentation in front of you. I also will share it on the screen here. So we have a presentation that we put together, looking with the Joint Fiscal Office and then also AFP to put this together to sort of provide a summary of what the transportation fund is facing right now. A lot of it will echo what you just heard from Tom. There's some graphs in there. And then Jeremy will come and talk about inflation, as well as give the more specific examples regarding to state paving and how that might look in the future. That's sort of an example for you all to think about. So the first two slides on here are sort of my attempt to summarize the issues facing the T fund. So as Tom just mentioned, Vermont state transportation revenues are stagnant. They're not keeping up with inflation. This is largely due to decrease in the gas tax, which is coming from increased fuel efficiency, some increased electric vehicle adoption, as well as just overall change in gas consumption trends. This is not a trend that we expect to reverse in any time, and you'll see as in the forecast in a couple of slides that we are projecting a negative growth in that revenue fund. Next, we have a demographic constraint within the state, which limits people buying vehicles and in turn registrations, and leads us to having relatively flat fee revenue year over year. And then the July 2025 forecast, as we just heard, estimates about a 1.33% compound annual growth rate in the T fund between 2026 and 2030, which is a rate far below what we have been seeing for inflation. There's also a number of increasing cost pressures growing, again, at a rate faster than what the T fund revenue is growing at. The construction industry specifically has seen very significant above even what the CPI and other things are. The National Highway Construction Cost Index saw an increase of 62% from 2020. And we have some slides that will go into that and we'll be deeper in a little bit. And then also, as everywhere else in the state, we've been seeing salaries and benefits increasing, which has also put pressure on our limited T funds. Then the big thing within transportation is drawing down our federal funds. This is a big issue. It's the best way that we can sort of utilize our money, but we do have a match requirement in doing so. Right now, the average is about 83% federal and a 17% non-federal match for most projects. It changes depending on the specific project. But with that, the IIJA, the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act, significantly increased the amount of federal funds that Vermont was receiving. And so we've had an increased need to attempt to match all the federal funds that we can, which is putting fiscal pressure on the T fund. And then Candace will go into this in much more detail, but beginning in 2017, there's a projected state match deficit of about $33.4 million, which does threaten our ability to draw down some federal funds. And then in FY28, the deficit is estimated to increase to about 35 million, impacting our ability to fully draw down all of our federal dollars. In addition to just making federal match, we have a lot of other requirements in the state, such as our town highway aids, our climate resiliency, general maintenance needs. The list goes on and on from there. And then lastly, if Vermont does not have the revenue to maximize our federal dollars, to keep up with our maintenance, to keep up with our capital needs, infrastructure will deteriorate and it costs more in the future to address. So backlogs are often difficult. They take a lot of effort, a lot of sustained effort to dig out of. And infrastructure isn't getting better as it's sitting out there. And as these things increase, the cost tends to increase and the work we have to do on them tends to increase as well.
Thank you. The IIJA, what is happening with that now? Because I thought Washington was pulling back on that or canceling some of it, or is it, are we gonna get what we're supposed to get or not?
So a lot of it is still up in the air. I don't believe they have passed a federal funding bill for transportation yet, so we're still sort of waiting to see all the specifics. I would also say the agency is probably the best source for up-to-date information on what they expect from federal funding and what we can expect in the future. I think Candace has a spreadsheet that she'll present a little later. It sort of gives a little more into their thinking of what we'll receive in the future. So that might be a good time to ask.
I normally wouldn't do this, but the secretary did have his hand up to speak. So if you want to quickly answer.
Thank you, Joe Flynn, Secretary, for the record. Just wanted to try to address your question. IIJ is funded through October 1st of 2026. There's been no rollback. IIJA is another way of saying reauthorization, which has been the funding construct, if you will, for transportation agencies for the last nearly 30 years. And it comes in 5-year tranches. So we're still within the tranche that was developed in the last Congress during the Biden administration. And this Congress now is developing the tranche, which will be released starting October 1st, 2026. But we still are fully funded, if you will, from the prior, or I should say the current slug of 5-year run. And our funding comes to us predictably. So we get this in 5-year increments. So we know what we're going to get in the way of federal funds.
And they're not gonna pull back on that.
Well, you know, they can do anything. We are very closely connected to many offices in DC, not just our delegation, but obviously our delegation. And it's too early to really feel comfortable. What we're hearing lately is that it's likely there will be growth in what we currently refer to as IIJA, which is ordinarily referred to and known as the Reauthorization Act. What might decrease is the large menu of additional competitive grants, which are not formulaic, and they ebb and they flow every year. So this last 5-year package had 20 additional grants that we've never seen before, for a total of 26, and we had always tried to pin the 6 that were historic. And all the other 20 were not all things we could avail ourselves of, but they were there. That's where we're hearing there may be cuts or elimination. So again, but I want to point out, just because it's out there, those aren't part of the appropriated package. That is an add-on that the last Congress agreed to do, which we were grateful for. It's possible that the aggregate of the next reauthorization and any changes to the grant list could result in net fewer dollars. We just won't know that until we get better information, probably starting about the beginning of our fiscal year next year.
Great.
Go ahead, Logan.
Let's see. This next slide is a look at the transportation fund path and then into the forecast. The green bars are sort of the available T fund as it came in that year. Once it gets to the sort of lined sections, that's what's being forecasted. And then that dotted line is if you sort of take the available T fund in the green bar and you adjust it for inflation and bring it down to a 2013 dollar level. This way we can sort of see what our purchasing power is on a steady state, and you'll see that as we go out and into the future, 2030, 2029, at a 2013 dollar value, we're actually expecting less purchasing power than we had in 2013. Questions?
Go ahead.
The inflation adjustment you use here of the personal consumption index, why did? I feel like on a previous slide, you were talking about a much higher inflation rate.
Right. So,
That you usually use for transportation expenditure?
so yeah, there is the National Highway Construction Cost Index, which is specific to highway construction costs. That could be an inflation, and I'll show you a chart that sort of looks at the T-fund growth with that inflation one as well.
Okay,
This one is just using a sort of a CPI, more commonly used inflation rate. And then in the out years, it assumes a 3% inflation rate. Just for comparison, you could do it either way. The one I think would be even more drastic than this one shows here.
You're showing the best case scenario here.
Sure, yeah. If inflation sticks to 3%.
Thank you.
The next slide is just the revenue forecast, which Tom sort of went through. On the left-hand side, you have the 5 major T-fund revenue sources, a couple years of previous revenues, and then the forecasted revenues. The first number is what was forecasted in January. The second number there is what's forecast in July, and then the change below it. So you can see at the very bottom, one of the reasons we are here today is the $7.5 million reduction. But I just wanted to point out the sort of negative growth in both the gas tax and the diesel tax. The growth in the one fund that we do have, the purchase and use tax, 3.81%, but then the relatively limited growth in both the DMV fees and miscellaneous revenue fees for that total compound annual growth rate over the span of this forecast of only 1.33%.
Go ahead.
This is a little in revenue weeds, so I'm happy to have you answer it, but it might make more sense for you to answer it. But I want to be clear, these questions aren't because I think that this will solve our transportation fund problems, like significant action will be required for that, but we changed who was sort of eligible to register their cars in Vermont, which might have resulted in a fee reduction. And so I'm curious just like about the scale of that, if you're aware. And then the other one is the right-of-way fees, which have been much debated.
Yeah, both of those
Scale of that.
I can't answer right now. I'm sure we could dig into it and see. I'd have to look back at the specific people who are no longer allowed to register and what that quantity was. I don't know if DMV or AOT has any data on that yet. And then I think with the right-of-way fees as well, there's some work that was done in the past, and I don't think we ever came to a like specific number, but I could look into that more for you and get you an answer later.
Thank you.
Of course.
And I can wait and I can ask the question again when different people are sitting in the chair. That would be helpful.
The next chart I have here is showing the T-fund revenues by those 5 categories that we just saw as a percent of total T-fund revenues. And really what this chart is just showing is that in 2015 at the bottom, gas tax was a relatively large portion of it, with purchase and use was a smaller. And then over the years and into our forecasted revenue, we're expecting gas tax to shrink in the amount of the total revenue it makes up, and purchase and use to become the largest source of revenue into the T-fund. Diesel tax is also going down slightly, and then the other two are growing slightly or kind of steady on, as we sort of expect.
One more question.
Go ahead.
Also in the weeds.
Sure.
Is there something about like a floor and a ceiling on the gas tax as it gets adjusted?
Yep.
And how often are we like?
So a portion of the gas tax.
And restricting.
A portion of the gas tax has a variable rate depending on the price of the gas tax. There's a 4% tax levied on the price of the gas tax pre-tax, so not at the pump. So it gets complicated. Anyways, there's a floor, a minimum amount that we can get from it, and a maximum amount. For as long as I can remember, and for a good while, we have been collecting at the floor, the minimum amount that we will collect from that, because of the price of gasoline has been cheap. If we see the price of gasoline increase, it is possible that we will collect more than the minimum, but right now, and for the past few years at least, I'd have to go back. I know DMV on their website has a tracking of all of it. We have been collecting sort of the minimum for that portion of the gas tax, and then there is the fixed
For
portion.
like the last couple of years, is that what you're?
At least, if not, probably last 5 years, but I would want to go back and check for sure.
Thank you. I'm sorry I didn't talk to you about this last week.
All right. How good.
So in your chart, in the miscellaneous revenue, the hope is that we will, before we get to 2030, implement a mileage-based user fee. Would that be in the blue on the right-hand side?
Yeah, theoretically, it depends on where we'd want to put it for reporting standard points, but you could think of that as a miscellaneous revenue. We'd still keep the gas tax, the diesel tax, the DMV fees, all of those. So it would sort of, whatever increase, we would see that there at
There's not a huge growth there.
in miscellaneous revenues.
Yeah, in the miscellaneous category.
Correct. Yeah, a lot of those are fees or jet fuel sales, or a long list of things that we go into that one.
My memory of, and this is vague,
Yep.
was that the mileage-based user fee, the registration fee, the extra registration fee that we added for electric vehicles,
Would go
was
away.
that last year or the year, whenever we did that?
Yes.
Was essentially set to around the cost of what we thought the mileage-based user fee was gonna be. So I wasn't expecting a big raise in revenue from that.
I thought it was about a half, it was
It
actually.
was about half of what we were expecting. Okay, thank you.
Okay, moving on. This chart just goes back to the gas tax and sort of tracks the gallons of gas that have been sold in Vermont. It's a 12-month rolling sum going back to 1994. You'll see the peak in the early 2000s, the slow sort of decline leading up until the pandemic. A slight bounce back after pandemic, but not returning to the level as before, and then sort of a steady state or slow decline as revenue forecasts indicate into the future. Then my last slide before I hand it over to Jeremy. This shows you the change in T-fund revenues, the change in town highway aid appropriation, and then that National Highway Construction Cost Index since 2010. So the gray line there is that construction cost index. You see massive growth during COVID and with the post-pandemic inflation compared to lesser growth in the T-fund revenues and then in the town highway aid that has been appropriated. And those two bumps that I mentioned there are, we gave one-time increases to town highway aid during COVID when we had some extra federal funds that could be used there.
Go ahead.
Logan, on your prior chart of do you have that with the vehicle miles traveled superimposed?
Probably, I could get you something. I don't have it on me right now, but I'm sure we could come up with a look at the vehicle miles traveled. I know they have decreased some. A lot of it is that vehicles are just getting more efficient.
Well, so I wondered, I know it's similar, but I wondered what the delta is, like,
Sure.
how much is it efficient?
I'm sure we
How
could-
much is just
We could find that.
remote work and things like that?
Yep, I'm sure we could find that. Any other questions from my slide before I hand it over to Jeremy?
It's Logan.
I'll be back up in a minute.
Thank you, committee. Jeremy Reed, Chief Engineer for the Vermont Agency of Transportation. So this is similar to Logan's previous slide. We saw a 54% increase in the National Highway Construction Cost Index. from the fourth quarter of 2020 to the first quarter of 2023. I checked this morning and it is continuing to increase. And I think that's the 62% that Logan cited, with the exception of there looked to be a little bit of a dip in the second quarter of this year. Not sure if that's at all sustainable. So I'm going to focus a little bit on the paving program. One, because it's the most reactive to funding swings, either positive or negatively, and it's the program that's most dependent on the T fund. As most of you know, a lot of the bridges are funded through the TIP fund, and there's less interest in trying to use those funds. It's a very select group of projects that can use those funds. And then a lot of our traffic and safety projects are 100% funded, so they don't tap into the T fund. So this is a very approximate methodology we use for our paving projects. Maintenance projects, those are the top line. Those are what we refer to as our district leveling projects. That's the worst of the worst, where we are just going out there and putting a Band-Aid on something until we can get back with a more significant project. The preservation projects, those are a good road, and we're just trying to maintain that condition. Level and overlay, mill and fill, just what it sounds like. We'll go out there, we'll either shim it to recreate the road profile and then put a top on top of it, or we'll mill off, say, 1.5 inches and put 1.5 inches back. It's a very similar treatment to our Class 1 town highway paving program, but the town highways, because there's utilities and manholes and curbs and traffic, is significantly more expensive. And then our most intensive treatment is our reclaim, where we bring it right down to dirt. We saw that most recently out on Route 2 that most of you probably have driven. And we do a handful of those projects every year. And what that does is that takes a road in somewhat disrepair and brings it back to good condition. And then obviously reconstruction we do very infrequently. So just to give you a little bit of a level set of what the different terms mean, we use good, fair, poor, and very poor. And this is largely intuitive. So we all know what a good road looks like. Fair, there's a little bit of cracking. Poor, much more significant cracking. And then very poor is what you would imagine with some extensive cracking, potholes, fairly uncomfortable to drive on. This, yes, sir.
Before you go on from this, with the testimony that we all heard in the transportation committees over the last year, if I overlay the previous chart where you are onto the good, fair, or very poor, and I am trying to come up with numbers to reflect what kind of a hole that we are digging for ourselves. Are you going to get to that? Or if we're at a place now where we're 20 to 25% of our roads in poor, very poor condition, and that would grow to 60%. And by the time you get to a very poor road, it all ends up into the reconstruction category here. The number is much higher than if we stay on top of these. So I don't have an overall number like that to be able to say to people, if you don't act now and you kick this can down the road, this is what you're really doing. And do you have that here, or can you produce those numbers?
Sort of. And why I say sort of is because we can always mill and fill. No matter how bad the road is, we can mill and fill and bring it back to a reasonable condition. I think what you're referencing, though, is how long will that mill and fill last? So if we treat the road at the right time, that treatment will last significantly longer then if we let it deteriorate, let the subbase become saturated and deteriorated, that subsequent treatment to bring the road back to a long-term solution will be much more expensive. It is very tough to model that though, because the way our models work is we give it available funding and it spits out the optimized treatment. It doesn't necessarily say, well, if money was no object, what would you do? Right? So it doesn't necessarily give us the optimal treatment at the optimal time. It gives us the optimal treatment at the optimal time, given the funding constraint.
I think what we all know is if we kick the can down the road, there's a cost.
Yeah.
And the real question is, if we kick the can down the road and we do that, for people to understand, at least in parameters, what that cost might be. And I understand that you may not be able to pinpoint it in a single place, but you ought to be able to give us at least some parameters around what we're really doing as we do.
And I think one of my next slides, which most of the transportation members have seen, will touch on that because, again, we fixed the funding constraint and it'll show the condition, which would take into account your point that we would see roads deteriorate quicker because we're not getting to the right preservation treatment or the right treatment at the right time. So we're putting more Band-Aids on, which then shortens the life cycle.
If we don't get to a place where I'm satisfied with the answer, it won't be the last time.
I just want to say, I really appreciate that question because I feel like the question of what a big hole we'll be creating in terms of federal match is sort of very clear so far, but how big a hole we're going to be creating in terms of the increasing cost of actually having roads that Vermonters can drive on isn't clear to me yet. And I think that's really helpful when we weigh our options for what we're going to be doing this session, if not today and tomorrow.
And from my point of view, I'm really not excited about leaving somebody in 5 or 10 years with a deteriorated system.
No.
That is much more expensive. So that is a cost that we need to look at. And so we will be back to visit this question.
Understood. So this demonstrates in recent memory anyway, what the total mileage of roads are that are paved on an annual basis. And again, there's various treatments within this total mileage. Some of them are reclaimed, some of them are preservation treatments, and some of them would be mill and fill in Class 1 town highways. Again, this is a comparison to roadway condition and looking backwards. So going back to 2012 to 2023, the darker green is our good, and then the darker purple is the very poor. And you can see, generally speaking, we've been making good strides on that front. There is a little bit of a blip with some invalid data during the pandemic, but not significant. The blue line I want to mention at the top of the slide, so that's our travel weighted average. We've got a performance measure of 70 for that, and what that does is that basically takes the volume of traffic on any given road and weights it. So roads that have higher traffic volumes will be weighted heavier than a rural road. So again, that's probably a little bit more reflective of the user experience.
Jeremy, on the chart that we saw earlier about what it costs per mile to do your various levels and your mill and fill and whether it's Class 1 and whatnot, but let's say it was 1.5 to 2.5 million, so it's $2 million. When you take this historic conditions chart and your bump in miles per year, is it fair to say that drop from 14 and 15% down to 8 from 21 to 22, corresponding with the 300 plus miles that we did, and then dropping down to the 135 that were just completed. We're talking about 200 miles, $2 million, $400 million to keep up to that level.
Yes, I mean, depending on the treatment type.
If I wanted to see that number drop under the 10 and stay under there, and I wanted to see what we had done, you know, we did 337 miles on a highway system that has 3,000 miles. So that's more than the 10% on a 10-year average that we hear a lot about in the committee. Adding to your question earlier about what does it take? That's sort of one direction to look at it, I guess, is what if we drop 200 miles and the best treatment is 1.5 to 2.5 million, that starts to get me a number that says if we're only in transportation and not limited by all of the other needs of our society, I would be starting at $400 million.
The 1.5 to 2.5 is probably a bit of a
Just to scare.
conservative number. A more realistic number would probably be closer to that 750,000, because there's a lot of treatments out there that we can do a preservation treatment on. And again, for a 10-year life cycle, a mill and fill probably would yield decent service. It might not be great, but it would be decent.
So if it's 750,000 and we have 3,000 miles of state highway, and we're trying to hit a 10-year average of 300 miles a year, multiply that, we dropped by 200 and plus miles, then maybe it's 200 times 750,000, and that number is not 400 million, but it's still
Correct.
185 million.
Correct.
I guess that's my pause of my impact on when you're trying to get around to what we'd really like to do versus what is the minimum we have to do, and what is the decision of what we're going to do. Those are pretty tough numbers. So thank you.
So this is our forecasted pavement condition going out to 2035. And again, so the way we model this is we take last year's paving budget of 103 million, and this goes through thousands of iterations and spits out the best treatment at the best time for that funding. But then it also tells you what you can expect for a pavement condition. And so we do see a pretty significant rise starting in 2029, let's say, where we've got 22% of the roads in very poor and 38% in poor. And then you see again, increase in the very poor. We are generally able to keep our roads in good and fair condition because of the cost of those treatments to maintain that condition.
So this is assuming an annual investment of $103 million.
Yes.
And I'm wondering where the 103 million, is that all the revenues that you're looking at? And is there any adjustment for inflation in this?
This is just level setting what we did last year. So this is assuming costs are the same and assuming the 103 is the same. So this is basically saying if inflation of construction costs and revenue stays the same, meaning the same buying power essentially, at that 103 level in 2025 dollars, this is the projected network condition.
Based on other parts of the presentation, it seems that in fact those assumptions don't really work, and in fact it will be significantly worse than this.
We don't know. I mean, right? Yes, if you tried to just sort of shadow or butterfly the past 5 years to the next 5 years, you're absolutely right.
Okay.
But we don't know.
Yeah, things could definitely get better the next 2 years. Okay.
Right. I mean,
Sorry.
yeah, I mean, I think 54 to 60%, 62% inflation over a 3 or 4 year period is somewhat unprecedented. So I would not try to predict that going forward. So instead of trying to guess at two variables, we just say, okay, in 2025 dollars, this is what it is.
But I guess I would also like to, that's 135 miles.
Yes.
Yeah. 300 miles a year is the goal. Just in paving. To get to the 10-year average on 3,000 miles is what we have. That's the picture that I want to make sure is very clear. 135 is not going to get, well, it certainly will increase the amount of phone calls. So, thank you.
If there was any core function that I think everyone expects from government, it is paving roads. And I'm glad that we're here to discuss
I
this.
think it's one of the central things
Yes.
that people expect. I don't think it's the only thing, but
No.
You didn't say that.
As
Did not say the only thing.
as the chair of Senate Transportation, yeah, I think we are talking about a basic service.
And I certainly appreciate that, but I am only in House Transportation, so I don't have them all knocking on my door.
They don't knock on my door either.
No, the rest of all of those other needs come from lots of other places, but for what we're here for today, I really want to emphasize where we're at in this situation. And this is what I've learned in my short time in this chair, that I fully agree that paving is considered a core. And that drop is really significant. And if we are on that, it will not take long to see a significant, visible and noticeable day-to-day in your commute impact.
I would say, I don't think at this point, the public really understands what's facing us. But if we don't take this seriously, we will hear from the public.
Logan's.
Thanks for putting there while we run our soapbox. Appreciate it.
All right, it's one last slide. So as we're thinking about this presentation and in the future, thinking about things, I just wanted to do a brief things that we've done sort of so far. This only goes back to 2020. I'm sure you probably know more about the details of these than I do, but starting off, we had utilization of the COVID related fundings as well as the IIJ money, as we spoke about. That allowed us to do a lot of things that we wouldn't be able to do otherwise. We repaid the TIB bond, so that we're freeing up $2.5 million that we could use instead of paying an interest. We used general fund money, $34.5 million, to fund our EV incentives as well as do an IT modernization project at DMV. We increased DMV fees, raising $20+ million annually. Over the past 3 years, we've also set aside funds to be used for that one-time federal match requirements, $45 million over those 3 years. And then just recently, last year, we eliminated the 20.25 JTOC transfer. So this is a problem that we've known about. We've been working on. We've been calling this pulling the rabbits out of the hat. We're sort of pulled our last rabbit at this point. So I just wanted to leave you all with this. Candace is going to come up and talk about, she has a spreadsheet, a 5-year sort of funding spreadsheet, and then the resettlement plan.
Hello, committee. Candace Almquist, Chief Financial Officer of the Agency of Transportation, for the record. Are we okay if I'm not screen sharing this Outlook online? It is posted and it's in the handout.
Right.
It is posted. Okay.
It is posted, so I think we're good.
Great. Okay. So transitioning to this document, this is something that the Agency of Transportation has produced annually since the implementation of the IIJA. We produce it for House Transportation, Senate Transportation during the legislative session, and we thought it would be useful to update it. So it's a point in time snapshot as of yesterday. So at the top here, we're looking at our apportionment. 2026 federal apportionment, and then the projection into future years is an assumption, 2.5% inflation assumption assumed. That was the same assumption that we presented during the last legislative session. The middle of the spreadsheet contains other non-competitive grants and competitive grants. Here, I want to note that it becomes more difficult to forecast competitive grants the further out we get. So you might look at this like middle gray section and say, oh, starting in fiscal 29, we're going to be applying for less competitive grants. But I would say instead, it just becomes more challenging to understand what competitive grants will be available. So the last row on the spreadsheet is what we typically focus on during the legislative session, and that's the AOT's best estimate of state transportation fund need. And I want to highlight some assumptions that go into this number. They're all written out below, but I think a few key ones are important for the committee. So last session, we balanced the 26 budget based on some of those one-time dollars that Logan referenced, 12.5 million, which was a transfer of the cash fund to the transportation fund. And it's assumed that similar transfers are not available for 27 and future years. We also eliminated what was known as the JTOC transfer, the 12.25. It's assumed that this appropriation to public safety would not appear again in 27. And if it did appear, this number would be 12.25 worse than it currently is projected at. So a part of the assumptions, we have inflationary increases for state employees according to the collective bargaining agreement and as instructed by finance and management for 27. We also have statutory increases for town highway aid, town highway structures, town highway class 2 roadway grant programs, which is an estimate at this point. But I want to call out the fact that all other funds are level funded. So if we go off of what Jeremy was talking about with the $103 million paving program, we are assuming that it's level funded. And against the inflationary pressure that we were talking about, if we have, a 20% inflationary pressure on contractor costs, on equipment purchasing, in order to meet that 103 million, then we have to reduce costs elsewhere. And a lot of times that reduced costs equates in less projects. I also want to note that the statutory increase for the town grant programs, again, not known at this point, but according to statute, the maximum is the CPI, which is right now from July 24 to July 25 is 2.7%. So I know that was a lot of information, but that's everything that I had prepared on this spreadsheet. I'm going to open it up for questions.
Go ahead.
Thanks, Candy. When do you, I know you've been in the position just 2 years?
A year and a half.
Yeah.
You're being generous.
Yeah. Because I remember a conversation with your predecessor that always sticks in my mind when I look at this chart. And so I don't know if you know when AOT started thinking that there was a problem. Logan had mentioned that, we've known about it for a while, but I don't know, like at what point has the agency been thinking about it? And your secretary has his hands raised, so maybe he wants to.
I could take a shot at it first, Secretary, if that's okay. I've read legislative studies back to 2012, where we've been highlighting challenges with revenue. The whole state, led by the Department of Finance and Management, did a 5-year budget gap exercise back in 2019, which really highlighted this issue. And this spreadsheet has been produced for the legislature since 21. So I'd say a while. I'm going to defer to Secretary Flynn.
I like just added to the study we did in 2019. We forecasted a $31.6 million deficit in state match by fiscal 25. And here we're talking about a $32 million potential as we look toward building 27. Much of what occurred right after we did this in September of 2019, and of course, in March of 2020 was the pandemic. So much of what we put into that study was completely upended like everything else. And then we, like the rest of government, we did appreciate some revenues from interest that's earned on, the funding that came to the state, if you will, for recovery. But it's just interesting to me that, through a lot of effort, forecasting, and much of this, of course, is not scientific, but we did, and we printed this document. 31.6 million by 2025. So, I mean, it just sort of reinforces, and we can provide that if you look at that.
I would just, oh, did you?
I just want to follow up with the secretary and say the part of that I just feel like I need to say, and I apologize because I probably say it every time you're in the transportation committee and we talk about this, is the lack of appreciation from the administration on the DMV fee increases that we did and what the impact that has. We would be so much worse. But yeah, we got heavily criticized for it, and I haven't heard any different story about that. So I know it's a political question, so I apologize, but I feel like I still need to say it.
And being that you said it's a political question, is that something you want me to comment on?
Well, if you have a comment on it, but I mean, your comment might just be it's a political issue.
And you know, you and I have had good, honest debate, and I respect that. Let me just say that there was a lot of context around that I think adds to the reality that you just said, if I may leave it there.
Sure.
Thank you.
Can yeah, go ahead.
Well, I was just going to make a comment about this. So if you've got a question.
It's more of a comment than it's a question-ish comment, but you can go.
Well, if I'm talking about a $30 million hole, the 12.5 from the general fund and the $20 million that was the JTOC money, that's 30 plus, and we couldn't have put together a budget this year without it. But most of those things, the JTOC money doesn't have an inflationary factor, and the 12.5 is not coming back. So we've kind of skated through this. The concerning thing to me in this is in the holes that look as we're going forward, the two areas that are 100% state funded in this are maintenance and money to the towns. So, and I think what we saw earlier is that gap for money for the towns, and we all have to go home. And, but those are the places that are 100% state money. And when we're that short, I think it puts tremendous pressure to maintain those areas that are 100% state funded. Go ahead.
So two things. One, I'm curious if the rescissions that we're looking at could have been covered by some of the revenue at the margins that I was asking about earlier. The question of the right-of-way fees that have not been charged, or the reduction of registrations we've seen from changing policy. And I understand it's the margins, but the rescissions are to some degree at the margins. And then my bigger question, which is definitely not for you, is I appreciate that you've been sounding the alarm for a long time, but sounding the alarm without any proposal of what to do about it is frustrating. And I just want to say flatly for the record, moving the purchase and use tax back is just a proposal to raise property taxes. That's not a proposal to solve a problem. And so I'm really hoping we can find, maybe not, in the next couple of years, ideally starting this year, a real proposal that's not just, moving money around, because that money that gets moved around has very real impacts for everyone. So I wonder if you have an answer about the margin.
The first part, yes. So thank you, Representative. So we on the format of how we submitted the rescission plan, we followed the last time we were required to submit, which was 2017. And at that time, we called it a rescission plan, but statute actually says that it's an expenditure reduction plan. It's just that your question of whether we could have included revenue sources instead of taking expenditures.
Oh, I'm sorry. My question was more, if you have a sense of if we would not have had to do expenditure reductions, if we had sort of a difference in those two revenue sources that I was talking about.
If we had more revenue, then we might not have met the 1% threshold that required us to submit the plan. but we were at 2.3%. So it would have needed to be like around $4 million or less.
And so statutorily, you're required to do an expenditure reduction plan, which does not include any solutions, but a rescission plan might include solutions.
Yes.
That's so fun. Thanks.
And statute also says that it's the Secretary of Administration. So the Agency of Transportation worked with the administration on this.
I think it would be helpful at some point to have some parameter estimates on what we're talking for dollars. And how much that would be if, with the, where we are now versus if we hadn't made those changes. Go ahead, Michelle.
I think the question relates to the red, white fees and what will be obtaining there. So that fee report is coming out on October 15th, and you said.
Yeah, so I have the report in my inbox. Honestly, I haven't read it yet, but I think when we testified 2 years ago, there was some initial estimates that that's about $1 million annually without considering any administrative costs that it would take to capture that money or to receive that money.
And do you have any sense of if the loss in registration fee is connected to us narrowing this? I'm not saying we should change that policy. I'm just curious about scale.
Yeah, we can get back to you.
My team is investigating some behavioral economic impacts of both that and also the raised fee increases. And we'll definitely be able to talk about that during the session.
Appreciate that. Thank you very much.
Mr. Chair, I failed to recognize my name for the record, Michelle Boomhauer, Director of Policy Planning and Development for the agency.
Thank you for correcting that. I didn't catch you either, so.
Right.
I would just, I have to say this as a transportation chair. If we're worried about property taxes, our underfunding of the towns and municipal roads, in many of my small communities, 80% of their budget is roads. So if we're worried about property taxes, at some level, we have to look at our towns and say, can we help?
Thanks, Senator. So I'm ready to move on to fiscal 25 closeout, which I just.
Is there any more questions about this? Thank you.
So I don't have a handout on closeout. I just was going to talk a little bit off the cuff about what we knew at the end of last session and where we ended up based on what Tom told us earlier today. So when we left the last legislative session, the Agency of Transportation knew about $11.8 million of reversions that we'd have to find in July. 6.3 million of that 11.8 was slated to come from FHWA funds as a reimbursement from administrative costs from the July 23 flood. And the remaining 5.5 million was testified to by me, actually. 1 million from 25 and 1 million for, 4.5 million for 26 needed to balance those two fiscal years. And I recall saying that I was comfortable with finding $5.5 million when historically we have available upwards of $20 million at the end of the fiscal year. But we saw revenue underperformance against consensus in February, May, and June, and this led us to need to identify an additional 5.7 million at closeout, not known during the session. So this was unexpected. It didn't change our closeout process, which is to have meetings with every manager that is a part of the AOT budget and talk about what they need to carry forward to the next fiscal year, 26, versus what can be reverted. So we were able to find the full 17.5 of reversions. We carried forward 20.8. So we had 38.3 to start with. We carried forward more than 50%. and all managers of an appropriation received their carry forward request. We solidified those closeout meetings before the July 25 consensus revenue forecast came out. And to move on to July 25, $7.5 million difference between January and July, which was a 2.3% change, as said by Tom, which triggered us to submit this rescission plan. So just give me 1 second here. I have so many documents. Okay, so I am prepared to go line by line through this rescission plan, if that's what the committee would like now.
You need to do that.
Okay. All right. So at a macro level, I just first want to point out that there are no proposed reductions to any town grant programs or district leveling in this plan. Line 2, the first one, quite possibly the easiest reduction on this list, if there is such a thing. In those closeout meetings that I just referenced, we go with project manager estimates of what is needed to complete projects for the summer and fall of 25. We took project manager estimates, which were just updated in the second week of July, and we added 270,000 as a very small cushion in case of project overruns. So this line item essentially takes away $270,000 for project overruns for projects that are being completed through mid-October. I'm going to move on unless there are questions on each line item. Okay. So line 3, transportation buildings.
Sorry.
Yes.
And it's just somewhat naive. So if your overruns wind up being higher than this number, then that gets fixed in budget adjustment, is that the idea?
Yes, pretty much. Our chief engineer, Jeremy Reed, may say that his program managers are already very conservative in their estimates. And the 270 was really just my addition as CFO at the end. So I don't believe that we're in a case right now where we would need to go to BAA, but we would if needed. Yes. Yes. All right, line 3, $2 million for delaying the Springfield Garage project. This was a part of the White Book. We have submitted an addendum to this plan that really details what exactly that project was going to be and will be. But the key point here is that we learned new information this summer from the city of Springfield that there's a water project. There's a project to extend the water line to that construction site. And we really wouldn't have wanted to start our garage project until they were done with that water line extension. So it would have made sense to delay this project until next summer, regardless of the rescission plan. But that is why that White Book project was selected for this rescission plan. Question? All right. Okay, line 4. We had planned some upgrades to a building within the Rutland Airport complex for employee convenience. And the inclusion of this line in the rescission plan essentially eliminates those planned upgrades. The upgrades, yes.
For the delay, you're saying eliminate, you're just eliminating for the fiscal year.
Oh, my apologies, delay. Yes, delay to a future fiscal year. All right, line 5. So this one will equate to the purchase of 4 fewer dump plow trucks in 26. And this basically means that our central garage employees will need to maintain our vehicles for a longer period of time. Our traditional equipment replacement cycle is 27 vehicles, although in the addendum submitted, that does change based on project or vehicle delivery schedule. The inclusion of this 575 here means that we're getting 4 less in this year. Line 6, tree cutting. This line item eliminates contracted tree cutting in 26. However, over 80% of a typical year's worth of tree cutting will still be maintained in-house. Line 7, $300,000 for preventative culvert maintenance projects. This line item eliminates a handful, 5 preventative culvert maintenance projects, which typically exist to ensure paving over deteriorating culverts does not occur. But we have confirmed that all of the culvert projects that would have been completed with this $300,000 did not have a scheduled paving project in 26. So they can be delayed to a future fiscal year. Line 8, $200,000 in contracted mowing services. So this is a 15% reduction in the contracted mowing services for 26. Our contracted mowing goes well beyond the clear zone, which we consider the safety zone, enough space on the highway so a driver can see the side and have a reaction time. So we believe that this 15% reduction won't have an impact on clearing the clear zone in 26. Line 9, $150,000 for the return or repurpose of iPads purchased for the Vermont Asset Management Information System, or VAMIS. We purchased iPads for the use of VAMIS by truck drivers, specifically for trip logs and winter salt reporting. Truck drivers will not be using those iPads for trip logs or winter salt reporting this winter. But we do have a pilot that we talk about in the addendum for this winter. But the result is that we can recoup up to $150,000 by returning that equipment. Okay, line 10, the cancellation of the technology project known as the Section 1111 Automation Project. So this project sought to simplify and standardize highway access permitting for Vermonters. So this project started in 21. There are sunk costs related to the project and significant staffing efforts. However, the selected contractor did struggle to implement the full business needs that were laid out by our team at the Agency of Transportation. So this was identified as a project that may not have reached completion, and we have put it forward as cancellation. Line 11, rail, $500,000 in a delay to the Rutland Platform Project. So this item delays the stabilization of the upper platform in the Rutland Amtrak station to a future year. We recently completed a temporary stabilization effort, which will stabilize the platform for the next few years. Design will occur this year, but construction will occur in a future budget year. Line 12, $100,000 public transit. So this line item reflects excess state match budgeted for the 5339 FTA capital projects, which are for bus and facility procurements. So based on the current delivery schedule, our agency is projecting $100,000 less need in state match. So this reduction will not result in any changes to existing grant agreements with transit agencies or service routes. Line 13. This line item reflects estimated savings from suspension of most travel, which was directed by Secretary Flynn on July 30th, when the consensus revenue forecast was received. I may turn it over to my colleague Jana Morse, if that's okay, to discuss line 14, the position management savings. But I'm happy to come back later. Thank you all.
Thank you.
Good afternoon. And for the record, my name is Jana Morse. I'm the Director of Finance and Administration at the Agency of Transportation. And I'll be speaking to line 14 of our expenditure reduction plan. So line 14 is about $2.25 million in anticipated position management savings in fiscal 26 and beyond. So we will not be able to avoid reductions in AOT staff positions. Many of these reductions are going to be accomplished through reduction of force of the 26 limited service positions that are continuing to be funded in the current year from the IIJA, or Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act. So we didn't realize as much work or as much increase in work as we anticipated. We heard a little bit earlier from our chief engineer about the inflationary pressures that we experienced and the nation experienced. So the dollar just didn't go as far as we were anticipating. So a number of these positions have been vacant for quite some time. A couple of them we were never able to fill. And in the fiscal 26 budget, the agency actually returned or did not fund 2 of the positions as a result of the increase in work just not being realized. We're intending to use vacancy savings from several classified positions that will be vacated throughout the year. These are known planned departures. And I'd like to speak just about vacancy savings for a minute. The agency assumes 5% vacancy savings in our base budget. So when we submit our budget every year, we assume that 5% of our positions will remain vacant and we'll be able to achieve the savings from that. So the vacancy savings that I'm speaking about here is above and beyond that 5%. So if we're looking at additional vacancies, in positions, it's not part of the initial vacancy savings that we assume. And then lastly, a limited number of classified positions are going to be eliminated as well through this reduction in force process. So I have the specific figures of the types of positions, but I'll take a break there for a second. If there's any questions right out of the gate.
It would be better if you went through the position categories.
Thank you.
And it would be get to the bottom line. How many positions that are filled that people will be moving?
Yes.
It would be better to present the whole picture.
The agency is intending to advance and has advanced a reduction in force of 28 positions total. 12 of those positions are currently vacant and 16 are currently filled. We are currently precluded from discussing specific details of these positions under the terms of the collective bargaining agreement. Those that are being affected have been unofficially notified and are receiving their official notification tomorrow per the collective bargaining agreement process. We've looked at the impacts to the agency's services and what we'll be able to provide, and the agency will not experience any service reductions at this time based on the reduction in positions. These are positions that we have not, they're intended to, most of them are intended to be terminated at the end of the current reauthorization period, which is September 30 of 2026. So the work for them would have been winding down anyway.
And so when you say no service reduction, does that mean also no extra service pressure on people who might be working with them closely?
That's correct. Yes. Thanks for asking.
Okay, go ahead.
So what you said earlier, it's 2 classified positions and the rest are limited services, or is that a different breakout of it?
It's 3 permanent classified positions and 25 limited service positions.
And 16 of these are filled.
Yes, sir.
I know you can't give us details of the positions. Do you have the sense, there's certainly vacancies throughout state government right now. Do you have the sense that these folks are going to be able to move to other positions in state government or other open positions? What kind of support do you provide for folks to find new positions? How does that all? This is sort of, I've been feeling like this is the first of what might be many conversations like this in the next couple of years. And so I'm trying to get my head around.
I am as well. This is the first time that I've been in this particular experience. We recognize that there are vacancies across state government. It would be the employees who are receiving their notice on Thursday or tomorrow. It would be their decision whether they choose to apply and whether they're eligible and qualified to perhaps, be offered one of those positions. There is a process that labor relations follows for how employees that are subject to a reduction in force are eligible or not eligible for what's called, the displacement rights.
Mhm.
And there's really a lot to that, and I'm not the expert, so I'm not comfortable explaining that. But if an employee were to be able to displace another employee, that could happen within the Agency of Transportation. They are certainly encouraged to apply for other positions. We just can't simply say, please go apply for this position. That would be an unfair recommendation to both the employee and anyone else. So there are processes in place. There are supports in place from labor relations as far as, and our recruitment teams in Department of Human Resources as far as how they might be eligible for other positions within state government, what that displacement looks like. And then there's some coaching from both labor relations. I believe it's labor relations and the recruitment team, but maybe more so on the recruitment team to help those employees kind of set some guidelines around what positions they might be interested in being notified as well. So there's some proactivity that happens, but it's through the Department of Human Resources and not through the Agency of Transportation. You're welcome.
Thank you, Senator Westwood. Jen, how many current positions headcount at the Agency of Transportation today?
1,311.
How many currently out of all the state vacancies, how many do you have in your agency?
Well, if I were to look at the report, it says approximately 100. The vacancy report does not take into consideration anything that might be in the recruitment process already. It simply says this position is not filled. There may be a portion of those that have offer letters out. There might be interviews occurring. There's a couple in there. I would say maybe 75% of them are in some stage of either reclassification to offer letter. And then there's a portion of those vacancies that account for that 5% that we assume in our base budget. So if we were to be successful with filling all of our positions, then Candace would be in a little bit different situation with coming up with some funds.
Which agency is the largest employer of,
Human Resources.
and where are you guys ranking that?
I believe we're second.
Thank you.
Go ahead.
And it is the case that the employees that are experiencing a reduction in force do get preference for other jobs within the agency or within state government over non-state employees.
There is a rather difficult algorithm for that has a lot of different factors. So depending on the specific employee situation, labor relations is managing the kind of how that works for each of them. Thank you.
You next begins. You're done?
So that included the business plan, but I can also come back up if there are questions on line item.
We're gonna do it all again tomorrow.
Yeah, we get it tomorrow.
That's a better question.
Yeah.
Candace, I did have a question. Which, the ones that are delays, which it looks like is $2.5 million. Those are just issues that are gonna come up on next year, right? And maybe also the reduced carry forward depending on things. And then the maintenance has some compounding expenses, even if it's not necessary this year. So it kind of goes to the point that Representative Carnage made about, we know this problem has been happening. We're pushing some of the problem to next year. So we know that there needs to be a solution. So it's not a question. Unless you have a question about, unless you have an answer to, is this just pushing, are those items that are delayed just pushing the expense to FY 27? And is there any nuance around that, or is that just clearly what it is?
So what I'd say is that, let's take the Springfield Garage project, for instance. Since that is back on the table, we'd have to have our folks consider Springfield Garage against what would have been included in the 27 budget. Realistically, I think a lot of these delays are just going to push out the schedule of what was already in the white book, but that doesn't mean that a change here or there might be proposed for 27.
Almost, maybe there's some of these, but maybe this is the nature of a decision. You're not trying to make permanent. I mean, I think maybe the unfortunate case of the last issue that we talked about, reduction in force, could be long-term, but a lot of these other ones are temporary. So we're going to continue to have this problem unless we come up with a solution on revenue or have rescissions that are more permanent. That's just more.
The only item that's a cancellation is the Section 1111 automation project.
And then positions.
Yes. I should have said when I was presenting the outlook that this rescission plan has been incorporated into the outlook that we discussed earlier. My apologies.
You could tell that.
Just to clarify, it looks to me like row 12, row 13, and row 14. Did move to a future meeting, but all the others would. Am I reading that right? I mean, I imagine you're going to go to conferences next year if you can fund it, but it's not like that's going to be. That's
Yeah.
push the conference.
In terms of making changes to the outlook, it was really only annualizing the positions that Jana just referenced. I didn't make any other assumptions on things that would change in 27 or future years. But if you're asking, what would be delayed in a future year, then yes. I mean, we're not making any assumptions on how this would impact 27 beyond line 14.
Go ahead.
Reduction in demand for the equipment servicing for purchasing central broad convention snowplow. So if your snowplow breaks, we used to have a clean roads policy, some of this, do you remember that? We don't. I think we have one wide lane, you can get a tire in either direction in it, clear policy. If you demand driven, so I assume that means you've got a snowplow that needs maintenance. If we're not doing it, we're giving slots. We're giving this really further behind plowing and our plowing paving should basically. That has a safety component. And that concerns me.
Absolutely, Senator. So the demand driven is mostly referring to the fact that Central Garage is an internal service fund. So the demand is coming from maintenance, Ernie's shop. And right now it's set at replacing 27 snow or plow trucks per year. But that does vary based on the delivery schedule. So right now, this reduction would bring the 27 annual for 26 down to 23. But in speaking with the Central Garage manager, we really are only going to get 16 snow or dump trucks this year based on the delivery schedule.
So you're not reducing the number of trucks, you're just delaying the purchase of trucks.
That is also correct.
Okay, but if, assuming when you purchase, my watching goes on up there every year, that you take a similar amount of trucks out of service. If we need 27, we're only going to get 16, then you've got to keep 11 older trucks in service. I think it's the demand-driven equipment servicing that concerns me. If you've got an older truck, it needs for servicing. And if we're cutting that, then we're going to have more and more trucks out of service, and I don't know what kind of condition they're in when they're bought. I remember discussions at the municipal level about the cost of maintenance equals the cost of the replacement. I'm concerned because this one has a public safety component that we are going, if Farmer's Almanac is right, we're gonna have a lot of snow this year. But we want those skiers to be able to get to the mountains. We want them to not have a terrible event on the interstate trying to get here, and I guess that's my concern, and I know you're the numbers person, you can't answer that, I think, but I'm just for the record, that's the one that will have a really public impact. If something goes wrong and we end up with a significant number of vehicles out of service. And I don't know if we keep a stock of supply, what that's like, or if we have to order parts and how long traditionally out of service, so.
Absolutely, Senator.
Expressing my concern.
Thank you. I had the pleasure of interviewing many people in the compilation of this plan. So if I may speak on behalf of our central garage manager for a second, you're absolutely right. We're going to have 11 dump plow trucks beyond their 8-year lifespan. And that 8-year lifespan is typically set by central garage. It's not in statute, but it is what they consider to be safe. It will mean more maintenance work by the central garage employees. We do have spares of our fleet. We have 25 spares. So they will be cycling in spares and they will be performing more maintenance on these 11 vehicles.
We have someone from Central.
Oh, Todd is here. I'm so sorry, Todd. Please speak to this.
Introduce yourself, Todd, and then.
Good. For the record, Todd Law, Director of Fleet for the Agency of Transportation, and Candace was right on. We typically carry 25 additional. Because there have been such significant delays in obtaining the trucks, we actually increased that closer to 30 to 35 this last year. And that gives us a couple different things. It gives us some for our own spares, but as you may recall, we actually loaned out trucks when municipalities who are facing the same issues had breakdowns. We actually have one out right now. I received a call today from the foreman in the town of Northfield who said he was just told originally they were pushing back his build schedule to December 2025. He was just called today by the vendor for the body and chassis, or body and plow, excuse me, that it was going to be summer of 2026. So we are looking to provide them with a vehicle for the entire season so they can continue, because this would cripple one of their routes with no spares in the town. So, we've really kind of grew our spares in anticipation of this and based on what we've seen for delivery schedules. So yes, it'll be more maintenance. We do a fairly sizable preventative maintenance service every year, and we're doing that right now. So, I don't think the traveling public will see reductions because we do have those spares. And, obviously, just like any other entity that performs winter maintenance, if something breaks down and there's not something to take the place of it, we expand routes, et cetera. But that's the district maintenance piece of that. So.
Thank you.
Unless there are further questions, we do have a couple of people that wanted to testify, and I thought we'd hear from them. And I think we need to talk amongst ourselves.
So Matthew, for public comments on Zoom, are you ready?
Yeah.
Awesome.
Are we ready with Matt? See on,
Yeah, sorry, senators, you know how it is. I'm part of the state, so it's like busy. But yes, thank you for taking my public comment, and I was listening in on your meetings, about this new transportation action plan. My concerns, as someone that lives in a rural area, and yes, I live in Albert, Vermont, actually Franklin and Grand Isle County. It's basically two districts, ain't just one, is two. Most towns near the borders are usually two, and it becomes a fiasco and stuff. But yeah, my public comment on this, is I know that you're having workforce problems, to make it more efficient, but also trying to cut down costs. My question is, to the senators, and thank you everyone for being here, is I know as you're talking about artificial intelligence, or algorithms. I know that most of the state of Vermont has this new project pilot program within Vermont other systems. I'm wondering how can we use this to make the system better. I know Vermont, has problems, making their systems better. But how do you look at this, knowing, moving forward, how can you implement this new program to make sure that those systems, we get the best technology, so we're not having to guesstimate, um, what our spending cost is, because we don't, like I said, it's just, for me, it's that's my public comment is just how can we make the system better, more efficient, so we're not having to spend money in areas where where we can actually recoup money, but also invest in other areas within the transportation budget, so we're not trying to double dip, as they call it. Thank you, senators.
thank you, Matt. I think, Nick, and I did say, I didn't say, and I should have, try not to go over 5 minutes.
Okay. I'll be even quicker than that. Thank you very much for the opportunity to speak. It's nice to see everybody. I'm going to speak to the bigger, more long-term challenges, not the rescissions for the FY 2026 budget. Nick Sherman with Leonine Public Affairs, and I'm here on behalf of the Paving Association of Vermont. And I really appreciate that there's been a lot of focus on the paving program in the conversation so far. I was going to speed read through a lot of the detail that's already been presented, so I don't have to do that. Obviously, the industry is very concerned with the outlook and wants to help the legislature and the administration in any way they can to try to find solutions. I will mention, I think, an operational piece for the industry that hasn't been talked about yet today that would, I think, factor in as well as the financial stuff we've talked about. And that is, these paving companies, they operate in multiple states, not just Vermont. It's Vermont, it's New York, it's Maine, New Hampshire, Massachusetts. And planning is very important to be able to, bring the best cost to this, whatever state they're working with. Being able to know what's coming down the pike makes a big difference, because they can plan where their crews are going to be and when they need to be there. And the agency has done a fantastic job. doing communication around that, advertising jobs early enough so the companies can plan for this. My fear is obviously if there is a massive reduction in the paving program, and the paving program lives and dies on the state match, that, you know, the companies will have to go where the work is, and that work is going to be in other states. And so that has the potential to make the cost of doing business, the competition, you know, may not be as good. Having to move crews from Maine back here to do projects will cost more. So it'll just be an additional impact, I think, on costs potentially if the paving program really shrinks.
Is that it?
That's it.
Any questions for me?
Just similar to your testimony during the session, right?
Yep.
Correct. Yeah. I have concerns about all the other stuff that was talked about too, but wanted to offer an additional perspective. Thank you.
At this point, Madam Joint Fiscal Chair,
Sir.
would you, are you looking for us to vote here? What are you
I
looking for us?
studied recommendation. I don't have a preference on how formal it is. It just seems that this is a group that's more qualified to advise on it than, want to make sure that.
So how would you like to see that recommendation come from us? It would,
Such a good question. We could do an informal straw poll. I think that sounds nice. That would feel clear. I'm also wondering if folks want to hear from someone from HR who can explain the
well,
bumping system tomorrow.
I,
Yeah, tomorrow. Would people want to hear that?
I think we're going to need to hear more about that.
Okay, cool.
I'm, at this meeting, I'm a little at a loss to say, particularly on line 14, that I'm good to go. You know,
Well, just about line 14, it seems to me most of the positions were the ones that were expansion limited service positions as a result of the increase in IIJA after COVID. Right.
I think that's some of it, but you do have 16 filled positions.
But those were 16 of the 26 limited service positions that were expanded temporarily due to COVID. And I think what we heard was that those positions were going to be phasing out. You know how we get those appropriations to positions, limited service, they're phasing out. Maybe a little faster than they were going to phase out, is what I'm interpreting what I'm seeing the nodding heads.
I guess I sort of similarly would offer, I'm concerned that we need to have a rescission and a rescission plan, and that we couldn't address the need for revenue in advance of this to manage it. And I am impressed with how careful this does seem to be in terms of, yes, it's kicking the can, which you're doing writ large across, well, really all of state government, but in a very accelerated way with transportation funds. But it seems like it is limiting the impacts of that as much as I think is possible. And I sort of appreciate how carefully it was done. And the people who are going to lose their jobs are people who are going to lose their jobs. And that's terrible. And I don't, you know.
But I think having HR come tomorrow would be helpful.
I also think, for me, I'm shocked that the union one isn't here, the SEA is not here.
Yes, it is striking.
To move ahead without at least hearing from them is,
Maybe they didn't know about it.
They did.
This has been.
I think at this point, we're in comment. So
Are you saying you're not comfortable with straw poll?
No, I'm not comfortable in the overall absolutely saying yes to everything in here. I think the agency has been very careful in putting this together. I think a lot of it does put a lot more pressure on next year. I think at this point in time, that may be the only thing we can do. But I do think that as you kick under the hood of this and you talk, whether it's buying trucks, particularly with the pressure that other communities are having and all, I'm not sure all of the ramifications after just a couple of hours. We know what they are. And so I certainly think that this needs to be advanced and talked about at joint fiscal tomorrow. And I'm glad we did this to set the stage. But I think there's some others that we will eventually want to hear from. And I'm not sure exactly what the options are. Do we have to tomorrow at joint fiscal approve all this?
We have to, we don't have to approve it, but we have to respond, we have to formally respond to it. There's a certain number of days between when it's offered and when we have to vote on the joint fiscal.
And that response means we have to say yes to everything, or we say yes to most of it and say, come back our next joint fiscal meeting. What does that mean?
That's such a good question.
We have to, if we disapprove, then we have to make recommendations to the secretary on what changes we'd like to see. So,
I wasn't suggesting disapproving.
well, it doesn't.
What the statute says.
I believe approving some of it is the same as disapproving it. I know we're not taking advice from the audience right now, but Emily Byrne might be able to clarify the statutory situation a little better.
It's in our packet.
And it's in our packet.
Yep.
Yes, so I believe you have 21 days from the day of, JFC has 21 days from the date of submission to approve or not approve the plan. And then there is another 14 days to sort of come back, I believe, and then have it next.
If we
The only JFC meeting that is scheduled is tomorrow, and then the next one, we would have to schedule another JFC meeting to move forward with that if the plan was not approved.
And so I think my hope in us meeting and discussing this extensively today before tomorrow was that if we did have things we might want to change, we would be discussing those today so that perhaps they could even be acted on tomorrow and not just figured out off the cuff.
I'm not sure I want to disapprove anything, but I do think.
No, I'm just saying that's what my hope this process was.
Go ahead.
Well, I'm in favor of a recommendation to joint fiscal committee to approve, just because I feel like we're not going to be able to do the work like Candace did, interviewing everybody and going through the entire giant budget of AOT and figuring out what changes we'd recommend. My ask of the agency, and I know it's tomorrow, but would be to hear what the plan is going forward, that we haven't had a plan on how to kind of fix this problem. This isn't a fix. This is dealing with the rescission plan as required. So I'd feel a lot better voting for the plan, knowing that the administration is going to work with the legislature on a more permanent fix.
And I would agree with Senator Pershing, and I feel like the agency has worked really carefully to put together a plan. They've talked to all the people, and that's what we pay them to do. And we should trust that that's the job that they're doing, and they've explained that to us, so.
But we do. This is kicking the can. The trucks are gonna need to be replaced. If domestic steel is going up the same as imported steel, then I think we can assume every one of those trucks, when they show up, is gonna cost more.
Plus tariffs.
Our revenue, people aren't gonna be driving more. And so we're going to have to find some revenue. Not some, a significant amount of revenue.
Yeah, and that's the can we kicked down the road. I was at the initial group in my old job running the RDC in Addison County with Michelle when she called together with people in 2012 or 2011 to talk about the fact that the gas tax wasn't bringing in more money. I mean, we've known about this for like 14 years. And here we are.
We could even call it a nonpartisan issue, given that that was two governments.
Yes, it was. It was a fact. I mean, it's just a fact that the gas mileage, and we haven't done anything about it. We've had a very long time to address this and we haven't done it. That's the can we kicked down the road that's gotten us to these cans that are being kicked down.
I would correct you a little. And I take a little offense at that. Because in 2009, I did vote for a gas tax. We created the tip bond fund and we put
Right.
the tax on. And part of the reason in the last 10 to 15 years, we've been able to keep up is because we had that money for match.
Yeah.
And we have reached a point where I will absolutely, I would say that I've had the lucky experience now of having been chair in the House when our bridges were in terrible shape and we pulled out of that for any number of reasons, some because of Irene, some because of the monies in the Great Recession. But we did proactively act so we could make the match at those periods of time. We've reached a crisis point now. And I'm lucky enough to have been in the chair at both crises. One in the House.
Maybe you're the problem.
Maybe I am the problem.
I think you're gonna have the solution.
Yeah. That's fine.
There we go.
Sure. Yeah. Now that it's settled. Yeah.
So related to today and this particular piece, I think you've done an excellent job of highlighting the bigger picture and trying to drive the conversation around what we are or aren't going to do in that. For the immediate issue, I am glad that the agency looked very much internally and also came from a variety of different areas, particularly hitting some in the white book on their own internal projects. Internally, that recognizing that perhaps they, in a 1,100 plus employee area, they really had a lot of work to do there. It's an immediate, it's internal. They did not touch town highway projects. They did not touch district leveling. They really looked internally on the piece. We have an immediate issue to move forward. I think they did that responsibly. It's very unfortunate that line 14 is there. But for the immediate piece, the work has been done and it's been focused internally. And we are not touching the town highway money or the paving district money. And there's plenty more work to be done. And there's been a significant amount of highlight of the issue of what are we going to do when we get back to session and what are those conversations going to be between now and then. But for this immediate piece, if I were giving my feedback to your next step of tomorrow, an immediate issue was triggered. They've addressed it. They focused internally and they didn't touch town or highway or district leveling or town highway projects. So I'm satisfied that they made some tough decisions with more work to be done.
I think your recommendation is, and anyone speak up, there's 5 of us here that we don't like it, but it's probably the best we're going to get.
I would say that's well said.
No, there are 6 of us.
Or 6. 6, sorry. 6 of us. What?
You've been here longer than I have, but my first election, I had to promise I would not steal in the transportation fund. Because there was so much money there that we were borrowing it. And that's how much it's changed in 20 years.
Well, I certainly appreciate that. It's good public policy that we're burning 65 million gallons less gasoline. It's nice that we're not polluting 65 million gallons of gasoline in a year. But with our 30, more or less 30 cents, that's $20 million a year we don't have. So
I would like to bet line 14 a little more at joint fiscal.
Okay, we'll find someone from HR. Do you want to, or do folks want to do a straw poll? Is that okay? Or do you rather?
I think you
Was
said,
that-
I think you
Okay, okay, cool, great.
Is there
I feel like
anyone that disagrees on here? So we're all
I
set.
have enough, thank you. Sorry.
Have you got enough? Okay.
Good, thank you.
I think at this point that we are at our conclusion.
Thank you.
Thank you.